Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, November 5th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the redistricting process for the 2022 House election cycle. As you can see on the map, it is starting to fill up with the number of states that have finalized their congressional maps for the upcoming midterm elections. Most recently, the states of Iowa and North Carolina have drawn maps that seem to be unfair towards the Democratic Party. Iowa actually is a bit fairer than some people might expect from a traditionally red state, but that is primarily because the Republican governor opted to use the map that was drawn by a primarily independent commission. But in North Carolina, it was a bit different. This state has actually gerrymandered it to a point where Democrats are going to effectively lose seats, and you are starting to see the Republican Party fight back towards the Democratic Party in many of these key states. For instance, looking at the state of North Carolina, there's actually a pretty interesting history about the redistricting cycle in the state of North Carolina. In the 2018 midterm elections, Democrats nearly won the popular vote across the state, and I think that they would have had the 3rd district not gone unopposed for the Democratic Party, meaning they ran a candidate, having that additional potentially, 60,000 votes, potentially somewhere around there. It might have been enough to push them over the top, 60 to 70,000, depending on the competition within that race. But regardless of what the results were in 2018, if there was to be an additional 3rd district Democratic candidate or not, the point is that Democrats only lost the popular vote in the state of North Carolina by less than 3%. In fact, it was 2.04%. Now, if you look at the House delegation from the state of North Carolina, it ultimately represented 3 Democrats and 10 Republicans, and that's where the problem lies. Essentially, the state redrew in a way in 2010 that made it so no matter how close the Democrats get to a victory in North Carolina, even nearly beating the Republicans in the popular vote, all they will get is 3 out of the 13 seats, effectively 23% in terms of representation. But before the 2018 elections, actually, a lower court said that their maps are unconstitutional. And then the Supreme Court said you don't need to redraw them for 2018, but you do need to redraw them ahead of 2020. And that partially can be understood as they didn't want to expedite the redistricting process. In addition to that, 2018 was expected to be a more beneficial year than 2020 was for the Democratic Party, so maybe that played into it when it came down to their thinking. All around here, what we do know is that by the time the 2020 election came around, the districts were drawn in a different manner. And with these newly drawn districts, Democrats were added 2 additional safe seats. That's right. The 2 seats that were added became solid for the Democratic Party. Now, with this new map, they may have won the overall popular vote in the 2020 election across North Carolina by 0.6%, but again, the maps were still drawn unfairly. North Carolina ultimately ended up with just 38% Democratic representation, despite Democrats actually winning the popular vote in the state of North Carolina. Quite interesting if you ask me. Just a very, very interesting election all around in North Carolina because the governorship actually went in blue. But the point is that an 8-5 map is fairer than a 10-3 map. But now the Republicans are fighting back in what they expect to see in Illinois and New York and California. Maps that they are expecting to be drawn in addition to continuing their already start of gerrymandering, as we've seen in states such as Texas, which have drawn it in such a way that Democrats can't win any competitive races. In addition to that, or previously competitive races, because obviously they are not competitive now. Or in a state such as Arkansas that took the sole competitive district and took it out. The same thing in Indiana. Same thing that we are starting to see in states such as Georgia that will be able to draw the maps in such a way that they effectively make more Republican districts. New Hampshire also seems to be putting forth some type of map here that is not beneficial towards the Democratic Party. But specifically in North Carolina, this map is, again, another egregious gerrymander against the Democratic Party. What the Republican Party is trying to do now with an additional district is make it so Democrats only get 3 out of the 14 districts. Before, it was 3 out of 13. 3 divided by 14 is 0.21. So 21% representation for the Democratic Party, regardless of what they win by. Because when you take a look at this 2nd district here, it's drawn in a way that the partisan lean is D+1, but knowing the national environment now, we know Democrats are probably not going to win a district such as this. And because it has been confirmed, the race to the courts have already started. But it could take potentially 8 years like it did in the past. But looking at some of these more deemed competitive districts, such as North Carolina's 4th and North Carolina's 14th, they're Republican plus 10 and Republican plus 12. Knowing 2022 and knowing a standard presidential election year, the next time these 2 districts might be competitive is when North Carolina actually is a blue state on the presidential level or potentially in another type of Republican, anti-Republican wave year if a Republican wins in 2024 or in 2028. So looking at North Carolina, This map certainly is an egregious gerrymander against the Democratic Party, and not to say that they haven't followed through with similar things, but it is something that's showing that the Republicans are not only fighting back, but continuing what they already started earlier on in this election cycle. I also wanted to cover Iowa, because this is a state that also just recently confirmed their maps. On the old map, they actually had 3 competitive districts. The 4th district was considered to be completely solid. Now, some would argue that this new map is a bit more Republican than it should be, but honestly speaking, it probably isn't. Donald Trump won the state by 8 points, 9 points in 2016, won it by 8 points in 2020. This state is still a pretty Republican state. 2 Republican senators, majority Republican delegation in the House of Representatives, Republican governor, and has voted Republican on the presidential ticket 2016 and 2020, and will likely continue down that pathway considering the decrease in rural support amongst the Democratic Party. But taking a look at the new map versus the old map, the new map puts the 2nd district in a more Republican one. Previously, it was Republican plus 4, now it's Republican plus 6. Not too bad for the Democrats. In the 2nd district, it was Republican plus 5, now it is Republican plus 4, but it's also considered to be the 1st district, no longer the 2nd. And taking a look at the 3rd district, the one with the Democratic incumbent, that is now Republican plus 2. I believe it was Republican plus 2. So the map actually isn't as bad for Democrats as they might have expected from a state such as Iowa. It is only 4 congressional districts, but I do think that they overall benefit because it could give them an election year where they're able to win all 3 of those districts, as they did back in 2018, which is also something to point out. Democrats did have that advantage back then. So looking at this map, we are starting to see different amounts of increased support for Democrats and decreased support. Based off of the change from old maps, Democrats have gained 5 Democratic-leaning seats and Republicans have gained 4 Republican-leaning seats. Now, when I say gain, I don't mean that these will be increases based off of their numbers now, but it means that Democrats who were previously in a highly competitive district are now in a safer Democratic district. Those Republicans that were in previously competitive districts are now in safe Republican districts. Texas is a perfect example of that. Taking a look at Texas, this state actually gaining, I believe, 2 electoral votes. Yes, 2 electoral votes relative to where it was before. Take a look at the old map for just a moment. This old map gave a number of seats that could be considered to be toss-ups, 6 seats altogether. In addition to that, they had 8 more seats that were considered to be lean Republican. Now, with 8 plus 6, those are 14 seemingly competitive districts, right? And then you have the Democratic districts here that were very solid, meaning that they weren't going to be at all contested by the Republican Party in an extensive manner. So knowing this, the Democrats technically could have won the majority of seats in Texas in 2018 or another election year with that old map if they had an exceptional year. And that scared Republicans. Because the old map was drawn in a way that was meant to be a GOP gerrymander, and then Democrats ultimately ended up moving and shifting around the state, and consequently, these districts got more competitive, the Republicans adapted for that in this new map. Essentially, they took all of these lean Republican districts and made them safe. They took all of these swing districts and made them safe. They took one district in specific and kept it as a toss-up, and they moved one into the lean Democratic column and kept one of the lean Republican districts. But the point is, what was previously 14 competitive districts has gone down to 3. What previously was 6 toss-up districts has gone down to 1. The point being that the Republicans in Texas do not want to lose and want to ensure that no matter what type of national environment it is, no matter what type of election it is, the Democrats don't get further than just simply 13, 14 seats across the state of Texas, which would give them not that much in terms of representation, and the Republican Party fully knows that. So Democrats actually came back in the state of Illinois and came out with this 4th proposal that is continuously gerrymandering the state into oblivion. I mean, this quite literally would make it so Republicans would win 3 districts and Democrats would win 14 districts. Illinois typically votes with 40 to 42% of the vote towards the Republican Party. And knowing that today, it would probably be a bit higher. But that really doesn't matter. In a gerrymandered map, it doesn't matter how people vote. All that matters is that the certain political party that gerrymandered the map ends up winning. And Illinois would perfectly ensure that when it comes down to 2022 or any other type of election year beyond that. But just pretty much taking a look at many of these maps that are now being proposed and potentially going to be confirmed. In fact, Wisconsin just released their final commission plan to be approved by the state itself. You can see here that Republicans are in the majority regardless. The old map was much more partisan, I would say. it did give the Democratic Party very little opportunities to win. They did hold 3 districts, which you might be surprised by. They held with Ron Kind in the 3rd district here, even though it had a partisan lead of Republican plus 9. But he's choosing to retire, which means that the 3rd district is undoubtedly going to the GOP. They also have added an additional competitive district, Brian Steele's district. This is also Paul Ryan's district. It is now considered a partisan lean of even. Previously, it actually had a better partisan lean for the GOP of R plus 14. So the map itself isn't the worst for Democrats, but it's also not the best. It will allow Republicans in most of those elections to win with an incumbent 6 out of the 8 seats in the state of Wisconsin, even though the state typically votes 50-50. And considering that that was drawn by an independent redistricting commission also might be quite alarming when it comes down to that, because the point of those commissions are to make the maps more competitive. I brought up the state of Arkansas briefly. Just wanted to point out what I was referring to. I'm referring to Arkansas' 2nd district, which was Republican plus 14, actually was supposed to be competitive for 2020, but did not end up being super competitive. We can actually take a look at the election results, not the presidential ones, but the House election results in the Arkansas 2nd district. I believe it actually might have been here on the, yes, it was Arkansas 2nd district. Ended up going to the GOP by about 11 points. It was considered to be competitive, didn't end up being competitive, but it was more competitive than it is now. What was Republican plus 14 is now Republican plus 17, which means what was Republican plus 11 in a good year for Republicans is probably going to be, in an even better year in 2022, Republican plus 15 or more. So in some of these states, you are starting to see fairer maps drawn, for instance, in the state of Iowa, but Republicans are still going just as hard in other states, such as North Carolina. A more recent proposal by the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire, where they have a trifecta even, took an old map that was insanely competitive. They took the 1st and 2nd district, which both have very split leans, Republican plus 1, Democrat plus 2. But because 2 Democrats represent that, the Republicans want to draw a map that makes it so they will have 1 Republican district and 1 Democratic district. And in the event of a wave year for the GOP, 2 Republican districts. But instead of potentially having 2 Democrats because of how close the districts are, the Republican Party here wants to make it so at least one of the districts almost always goes to the GOP. And I think that honestly might be a better bet for the GOP, but it is a gerrymander in the state of New Hampshire. Typically speaking, you don't deviate much from this older map. You usually crack it right down the middle. And of course, it does come down to partisan boundaries and everything. But right now, the Democratic Party wants to propose a fairer map when it comes down to competitive nature. But then again, you're not looking at much of a change. In fact, the change doesn't seem to be making any noticeable changes at all when it comes down to the proposed map versus the old map. But because Republicans have a trifecta, they will undoubtedly pass a map that is more beneficial for themselves and their future goals. So to take a Republican district plus 1 and make it partisan Republican plus 9 is very telling of what their goals are. In addition to that, they are shoring up one of these Democratic seats, but it also leaves the realm of possibility that in the event of a wave year for the GOP, that they also are able to win in that 2nd district in the state of New Hampshire. So all around here, what you are seeing is that these maps are being drawn intentionally gerrymandered, and you are starting to see them drawn in ways that are seemingly unfair, but that's just how the standard political process works. Illinois, Texas, North Carolina, these are all states, Oregon, where you have started to see gerrymanders across the United States. And many people are upset about that. But that is how politics works, and that's exactly what we're going to see in many states beyond the few that I just mentioned. Once Georgia and Florida and Pennsylvania and New York and California release their maps, we will start to see them higher in effect with larger populations. Once Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin finalize their maps, we will see. Will it be drawn in a fairer way? Colorado actually was recently drawn by a commission. I talked about why the Democratic Party really hated this map because it was one of the first that was actually confirmed here. It gave the Republican Party the opportunity of having the majority of seats in the state of Colorado. Now, if you don't remember, Joe Biden won the state of Colorado by 14 points statewide. So to have Republicans in a very real possibility of winning the majority of seats here doesn't seem to be a fair representation of the population. But the point of these redistricting commissions isn't always to represent the population fairly or the partisan lean of said population. A lot of the times it deals with making districts competitive and trying to draw out different ways to make them all together work in an effective way and a fairer way. And sometimes that's more difficult, and it's also easier said than done. But in Colorado, Democrats are a little bit angry about this map simply because it does put them at a disadvantage for 2022 knowing the national environment. But then again, that is also on Democrats in order for them to prevent such a thing from happening by being better at American politics today, because right now the American public doesn't seem to be too happy with them. So as more and more of these states start to roll in with their maps, I will continue covering it. I think that this is just very fascinating to see the sometimes dramatic and not so dramatic shifts relative to old maps. Iowa wasn't really that much of a change, but North Carolina seems to be reverting right back to where it was before and cutting out Democratic seats for the sole purpose of cutting out Democratic seats. Looking around the United States, we can start to see proposal maps and expect them potentially from some of these smaller states: Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana. Once we start to get more of those, we can get a better idea of what the GOP plans on doing. Florida, California probably will take a little bit longer than we expect, but hopefully we will get all of those maps by the end of the next election cycle. Hopefully we can get them before 2022, by the end of this year or by the beginning of mid-2022. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.